Hi guys, welcome back to another video. I thought I'd try something different today. If you don't change or try new things, you never grow. So what I'm doing right now is I'm washing the dishes, and as you keen observers could probably tell by the little clock on the stove next to my arm there, it's 11, it's about quarter after 11 p.m. and I'm just washing the dishes so I don't have to wash them when I wake up in the morning. So I've been thinking a little bit, and I put this on my Reddit, or I put it on Reddit the other day on, I guess, Russian literature. I think the Russian literature subreddit, and so I keep looking over there because I think the camera's on the computer. Anyway, I was thinking about Tolstoy, and he's my absolute favorite author, and I was thinking that one of the thing is this weird thing, like you think of these weird topics for videos, and one of them was I was thinking about what the things that Tolstoy hates, and so I posted that on Reddit, and I was thinking about that, and it was kind of a more difficult thing to to think about than I first thought, and so doing some thinking about that, you really like Tolstoy's personality. I don't know if his personality changed over the years, but his views certainly changed radically from his first writings, say childhood, boyhood, youth, when he was a young man in his 20s, to the time he got married and wrote War and Peace in his 50s, to his late writings after Anna Karenina in the 80s and beyond. And so the things that he hated, well, the thing is, this is the thing, Tolstoy's funny because he really can be defined, he can be described in terms of the things he hates. I know that's funny, but I think people who read Tolstoy know what I'm talking about. I think with any author, you come to realize the things they love and the things they hate. And I think with Tolstoy, he's just so blatant in some ways, and some of these things have remained stable over the years, but some of the things have changed. Like for instance, his pacifism. Like he was in the Crimean War. He was I don't know what his rank was. It wasn't very high for a nobleman. He kind of fought in the Crimean War, and that's where we get those amazing works like Sebastopol's sketches, and that's where he was able to bring so much expertise to writing War and Peace, because he actually knew what army life was like. But anyway, so and then his later life, he became famous for his pacifism. So you say, well, there's lots of changes over the years, right? But I'm looking at the things that are closer to the basic level of his personality, not like his views. I think views are symptoms of a personality. I don't think they're the whole personality, and I don't think they're the whole personality of, and I don't think they replace a personality. But anyway, so the things that, I mean, this is one of the points I came up with in thinking about this, was that Tolstoy's a funny mixture of a radical anarchist with someone who always maintained a certain aspect of his aristocratic upbringing. It's hard to turn your back on everything, and and his moral views, certainly he wanted to distinguish himself from the anarchists and the socialists of his time. And you see this very powerfully, for instance, in Resurrection, where and I mean, he makes it very plain in his political writings and his religious writings, and why that was so, and the greediness, the draconian sort of realpolitik of the Marxists and the anarchists is, I mean, he said that violence is always based on selfishness and passion, and those weren't those weren't things that the that those weren't positions that Marxists would endorse very strongly. And I think in some sense, Tolstoy was what he came up with was not that far different in a way, or maybe parallel to the great Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, who eschewed all the trappings of being the most powerful man in the world as the Roman emperor, and sort of developing that philosophy always runs a counter against the culture in a way, because it has to be critical of the culture, right? Philosophy is only philosophy when it's critical of the culture. It doesn't mean it rejects every aspect of it. Obviously not. You think of Aristotle and Plato, or even later French philosophers of our era. They embraced as much of their culture as they condemned, but nevertheless, a philosopher is someone who holds a critical eye against his culture. So with Tolstoy, it's easy to say, oh, he was born with a silver spoon and always stayed that way, and he wasn't able to be a true philosopher because of that. But that's not true. That's not any more true of him than it was of Plato or Aristotle or Marcus Aurelius or Descartes or anybody. But I think, okay, when I think about it at this point, in my process of thinking, why do I keep going back more and more to the Stoicism? Because if you read Tolstoy's early works and his journals, I should say his journals especially, this stoical mindset emerges, and it's so funny and it's so different. I mean, it was certainly an aspect of him and his view of life that appealed to me at the time, and still does. But when you think of, so the question you have to ask is, well, why? Compare him to his slightly older colleague Turgenev. Turgenev, he was no Stoic, not in any sense of the word, and his commitment to literature didn't lead him in that same path. So that's the thing. Like, why was that there? So ultimately, of course, Tolstoy's Stoicism, he tried to differentiate that from Christianity. He had a love-hate relationship with Christianity. But in the end, I think he had to realize that, well, the Stoic values that he endorsed in his life were gospel values, right? So, like, more or less, they were gospel values. So that's his personality. And when you think about someone like Turgenev, he was no Stoic. Dostoevsky was no Stoic in that sense. I bet he was a Christian in the ordinary sense of the word. Like, he was, I think you could say more or less a Russian Orthodox, member of the Russian Orthodox religion, whereas Tolstoy was, of course, famously excommunicated from the church in which he grew up. So there's a difference, I think, and the reason why I kind of prefer calling him Stoic rather than Christian is that Dostoevsky's Christian, right? So I'm making a bit of a distinction there. So, and that's something that didn't, as I guess I'm trying to say, that didn't emerge late in life. It didn't emerge halfway through life. That was something, for some reason, he was born with. And in the end, when we're talking about the trade-off between his noble upbringing and his intellect, in the end, of course, the intellect wins over, and he chooses the path of philosophy, and his famous pacifism, veganism, celibacy, all these are just, in a way, the ultimate consequences of an aspiration and a set of values that he had since he was a boy. So So if we look at his works, then we can see this unity, this connecting thread throughout his whole life, and I think that's interesting. You know, he Tolstoy was hilarious in a sense that he's the only guy from the 19th century that I've ever heard of lifting weights. Um, who did that in the 19th century? I mean, most people, worked physically, right, for their jobs, but of course, Tolstoy was a nobleman and he didn't have to physically work, unlike the millions of peasants around him. Working out, like bodybuilding and weightlifting, is a thing that emerged only with the at the at a certain point in the Industrial Revolution, when people weren't getting their physical exercise or exhaustion from their jobs, right? So that's kind of funny. Like in the earlier time, the aristocrats kept physically fit. Like even in his own age, he loved hunting, horse riding, and all that stuff. And training for war was the nobleman's job. And as organized militaries began to replace the hierarchy of the military hierarchy, that an aristocrat was born to fight, and that was his life, was training. And that didn't end with the end of the Middle Ages. That carried forth for quite some time, and was one of the things that was so famous about Louis XIV building Versailles. He was basically emasculating all the nobles and turning the military completely, in a way, completely over to himself, and being able to get rid of the middlemen, the counts and the dukes and all those people who virtually had their own armies in their own regions. So it lasted a bit longer in Russia, and I think if you study Tolstoy's life, even, that military commitment remained in place. Now, of course, there's the really interesting part of War and Peace, for instance, where the great Andrei's father, Prince Andrei's father, I can't remember his name right now. You see his role in organizing a militia as the French army gets closer and closer to Moscow. You see that Andrei's father rising to the occasion and getting involved in raising his militia. And that was like, Russia was in a way more of a traditional culture, obviously, than the West, and so you see that little bit, and that's not something that you should easily miss. But I think that it's funny in that sense, is that this stoicism of Tolstoy's, I compare that to his, like, I contrasted that with his aristocratic upbringing, but in a certain way, it was a part of his aristocratic upbringing. Hunting was military training, and the reason he could so easily enter into the army was that he could ride a horse, shoot a gun. He knew all that stuff, and that was why aristocrats usually got, preferred treatment in the military and so on. It wasn't just because they get all the perks because their friends are calling the shots. It's because, well, that's was supposed to be their job, was training for the military. So anyhow, I think that it's interesting when you think of, like, when Tolstoy was born in the 1820s, 1830s, and when he died in 1910, the world was greatly reconfigured. And I think that it's funny how, seeing that Tolstoy standing alongside that, acting as a part of it and reacting against it and so on, it's interesting, and it's sort of, all this weaves all his different works together. So anyway, so that's just part of what I wanted to talk about today, and hopefully my dishwashing, which is now complete, didn't annoy anybody, but made it more of a mise en scène. You see? Yes, I'm a very well-educated man. So anyway, thanks guys for coming, listening, and we'll talk to you again real soon.